Thank you. So so my name's Alex Rothenberg, and I'm going to be talking about the Chirpolith and how we spent, the last year migrating our messy application to Ember. So I work at a company called Iora Health, and we're founded by doctors, and our mission is to restore humanity to healthcare. So we do that by running primary care practices around the country, where we serve about 15,000 patients right now. And if you've been to your doctor recently, you've probably noticed them in the corner typing on a computer. And if you've looked over their shoulder, you may have seen sort of an ugly application with lots of gray boxes and complicated interface. It's hard to understand. And that's because those applications are typically been built for billing systems, for insurance reasons, not for patient care. So, our CEO had used a lot of those systems in the past. And one of the first decisions we made as a company was we were going to build our own, because he hated pretty much everything he had used in the past. So we call our system Chirp. And it's really designed to do everything that we need to do to help the practices run. So everything from scheduling to documenting a visit to ordering labs to refilling prescriptions. And from day one, it's been a JavaScript-heavy application because we wanted it to be friendly and easy to use and really get out of the way between the doctor and the patient. But day one was a long time ago. So we started building it back in 2011. And at the time, the state-of-the-art for JavaScript was Backbone. So we started as a Backbone application. And Backbone was great, but it's much lower level than a tool like Ember is today, right? It's a much lower level library. And before long, we realized we weren't only building our own application, we were building a custom ad hoc framework on top of Backbone. So, we looked around the community, and there was something called Backbone Marionette that was emerging. So we started to take pieces of our application and extract them into a separate application built using Backbone Marionette. And that worked well, but we kept looking around, and we saw Ember. And we got excited about Ember, so we did the same thing. We took other pieces of our application, extracted it out. And you can imagine, right, we're beginning to get a pretty messy system, right? Lots of different technologies, lots of different applications. But we weren't even done yet, because we also looked around and we saw React. And we thought, this time we wouldn't make the same mistake, we'd do something different. So React's a view layer. We thought, can we just use it as a view layer inside our Backbone application? And we did that, and that worked pretty well. But we had really sort of painted ourselves into a corner. At this point, we had a pretty complicated, bunch of technology and bunch of application that we as engineers didn't really want to work on. And to the product team, it was frustrating to them because everything was expensive and hard to make changes to. So, it took us about 5 years to create this mess. And what I'm going to talk about is how we spent, basically the last year plus digging ourselves out of this mess. So, what we decided was we weren't going to, make the same mistakes we made in the past. We're probably going to make our own special new mistakes, but, we were going to try and learn from the past. So we thought about the things we had done wrong before, and, the first thing is, each time we tried to dig ourselves out, we didn't really know where we were headed. So we knew the small little thing, but if it was wildly successful, we didn't know what wild success would look like. So this time we decided wild success would look like a nice, clean Ember app, something similar to what you would create if we'd started in a greenfield world instead of the brownfield world we were in. The second thing we did is each time we extracted a chunk of functionality, we did it as a big bang release, right? So users saw nothing, 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 and then we dropped this big change on them. So we weren't going to do that again. We were going to work in really small incremental changes. The last thing we did is each change just made our world more and more complex. So we weren't going to do that, right? We were going to reduce the number of technologies we had, reduce the number of applications. And the last thing is we could never, maintain our momentum. Every time we started off, it started like gangbusters, but then we lost interest, we lost motivation, and so we came up with some techniques to keep motivation throughout this process. So because we had worked with all these technologies in the past, we realized that if you squinted hard enough, so you ignored all the details about the application, they all pretty much do the same thing, right? So they take a URL in, they do some pattern matching on the URL to figure out what to do with it, they call some APIs to load your data, and then they build an interactive DOM with that data in it. And that was true of all of them. And we also realized that from when we had done the experiment with using React as our view layer inside the Backbone app, that you could mix these technologies together. So we thought, what if we did the same thing as that experiment, but we flipped it around? What if we put Ember in charge, let it take over the routing layer, but made use of all of our existing Backbone code? And then slowly over time, we could replace that Backbone code with Ember code until we'd end up with a nice, clean Ember app. So that's the project I'm going to talk about and what we did. So let's get started. So the first thing we needed to do, if we were aiming towards having a nice, clean Ember app at the end of the day, was we needed to admit we didn't know how to do that. So we brought in Mike North from Front End Masters to do some training, and it was really great. He came in for a couple days and really gave us a great foundation of how Ember worked, the philosophy behind Ember, how to think of routes, components, models, right, all of it. But something else he gave us was also just a voice of authority. So later, when the time came to start building our application, and we would begin to get into the religious debates that all teams get into, we could back off and say, let's just do it the way we learned in training and cut those debates off at the pass. So we want to build a nice, clean Ember app. We did it the way all of you guys would do it, right? Ember new. We'd start our Ember app. But we weren't really building a greenfield app. This was a brownfield world. So we had to do a little bit of work to integrate it with our existing build scripts, our existing deployment scripts. And basically we treated all of our legacy Backbone code as a third-party vendor code. So we could just call into it by loading it that way. So now we had a nice Ember app that did absolutely nothing. The time came to make it start doing something. So we started at the top layer with the router. And one of the things that our doctors do a lot in the office is they're documenting the visit, right? So they're writing notes and reading the old notes to remind them what happened in previous visits. And we looked at our old Backbone routing tables, and when we started creating the Ember routes, they did the same things, but the fact that Ember pushed us into having these nice nested routes all of a sudden got us really excited, right? So when we started having a note view route, a note show route, it could really focus on just the note, right? It didn't have to load the patient and everything else for the other parts of the page, right? We had an ancestor route that could take care of all of that, and the note show route could really just focus on the note. So we went in and started building that route out. And when you typically think of building a route and the model hook, right, you're probably used to thinking of calling into Ember data to load your model. But there's nothing that says it has to be Ember data. So we were able to call into our old Backbone model and load the data that way, which was great. And if you look really carefully here, you might notice, right, this is not just loading the note, it's get or fetch. Because in our old Backbone world, we didn't have something like Ember data that would do some intelligent caching of what's in the browser, what's already been loaded or not. So we built our own caching mechanism. And it's kind of a joke in computer science that caching is one of the hard problems, but it really is one of the hard problems. And we really didn't want to be in the business of maintaining our own caching library. So again, we were excited for the day where this would go away and we could just live in Ember data land where this would take care of this for us. So we had our route. We went in to build the component. So we did pretty much a similar pattern where we would call into our old Backbone view that would load the view for us, passing in the model, which remember is the Backbone model. So it all worked fine. And the only trick here was we had to get that Backbone view to render itself in the part of the page that Ember had set aside for the component. So it turned out that wasn't that hard. In the component, we could ask the component for the DOM element that Ember set aside for us and just pass that into the backbone view, and it would render itself. So the last thing we did is just a little bit of cleanup. When Ember tears down the component, we just tell the backbone view to clean up after itself, unbind events, whatever else it might need to do. So will this work? And the answer is, for the most part, yes. Inside the red box, we have that component we just built, right? So it is loading data from the API and displaying it on the page. So that was great. But if you look up at the top, you can see a link to notes. So that's taking us back to the index page of all notes. And if you sort of look carefully at the link here, right, it's starting with a hash. And again, that's because back when we started this application, hash URLs was how you did front-end navigation. Now, of course, that's not going to work in a modern Ember app where we use real URLs. So, at first, we all started getting depressed. This was, we were going to have to go into all of our old code, find all the links, and start rewriting them. And that seemed like a huge pain, and exactly what we want to avoid, which was, going into that old backbone code. But, then we realized Ember actually gave us the tools where we didn't have to do that. So we wrote, a little bit of code, stuck in an instance initializer. And what it does is it uses Ember's hash location API to ask it to notify us anytime the hash URL changes. And whenever it does, we just strip off that leading hash and send the rest of the URL into the Ember router, where if it's a URL that we've already rewritten and we have a route for, everything's going to work great. The Ember router will route it to the appropriate route. And if it doesn't, we just stuck a new wildcard route at the bottom of our routing table that would navigate us out of our new Ember app back to the old legacy app. And once we did that, it actually worked. We could not only display the data, but we could link back across, URLs and links worked as well. But there was a problem. Navigating between two apps was really slow. Every time you leave an app, you left the Ember app, load the backbone app, you clicked a link, load the Ember app, right? Loading a new app takes time. So, luckily we had a good feature toggling system. So we were able to keep, migrating these routes and releasing them without turning them on for users, so without inflicting that slow pain on our users. And it took, about 6 weeks for us to get all, 32 of our routes migrated over, and then we were able to turn it on for all our users. And that made us really happy, because then we were able to start deleting some backbone code, right? All the old backbone routes were unused, so we started deleting, and we felt like we were on our way. So once we had these 32 routes in place, each one wrapping a single backbone, or each one with its own component, and each component wrapping a single backbone view, it was time to start rewriting those backbone views and putting the logic into Ember. But before too long, we started seeing pull requests that looked like this. They were enormous. They were too big to deal with, too big to review, too big to make the changes incrementally and quickly. So what was going on? So we thought we were living in a world like this, where you had one component wrapping one view. But once we dug into the backbone a little more, each view was really coordinating with many child views. And there's just a lot of logic in there. So we did what you do when you have a problem that's too big to handle, and we broke it down to a series of smaller problems. So we realized if we could wrap each of those child views and then replace that coordination from backbone in Ember, now we had smaller problems, and we could just rewrite each component one at a time until we were left with a clean Ember, pure Ember, Ember-only solution. So that's how we rewrote the view layer. But what about the data, right? We didn't want to deal with backbone models. We wanted Ember data models. So we had to also rewrite the model layer. And we thought we had done a really good job designing our APIs, that we were really consistent. But once we moved into an Ember data land, which really pushes towards the consistency, and anything that's not conventional, you got to fight Ember data on, we realized we weren't. So we usually had root elements, but not always. We sometimes had two different URLs serving the same resource, often with slightly different attributes coming down. And some of our URLs were non-RESTful. And we'd built our own homegrown errors and pagination solution. So we were able to work through all these problems, but there was pain. And we started asking ourselves, should we just rewrite our APIs in something like JSON API or GraphQL, something conventional? And the answer was maybe we should, but not right now. That we wanted to keep our focus on deleting backbone code. And rewriting the APIs was a good idea, but wasn't going to help us delete backbone code. So basically we had a list of technical debt that we'd get to later, and we put it on the list, and we moved on with the existing APIs. And now we were in a place where we had a system, and we could work through these components one at a time and tackle them and make the changes. So that was all good. Now I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the other problems we had made when we had extracted all those different applications. So one of the applications we had was our scheduling application, where you'd schedule patient visits, see who's coming in for the day. And a really common use case was to go from the schedule into a patient's face sheet, back to the schedule. You'd go back and forth a lot. And that's the same problem we had before, where you're leaving an Ember app, loading a new Ember app, leaving that Ember app, loading a new Ember app, right? So it's the same problem of it being slow. In the past, when everything was sort of slow, users noticed but didn't notice a huge amount. As we migrate more and more into Ember, and the Ember apps started getting faster, users didn't always notice the app getting faster. They noticed the things that remained feeling slower. So we knew we had to tackle this problem. And this is where we decided to take the Chirp face sheet and the Chirp scheduling app and combine them together into one Chirpolith. And so the problem we had when combining two apps is similar to the problems you have when you're merging two Git branches, right? As long as you have no conflicts, it goes super smoothly. But anytime there are conflicts, you're in a world of pain. So where did we see the conflicts? The first place we saw conflicts was just in our own code. So that could be any of the code we wrote, routers, models, components, and pretty much if you had the same thing that was named the same way but was not exactly identical, that's a potential conflict. So for example, both of these two apps had a patient details page. And in the face sheet, right, the patient details displayed pretty much everything about the patient, whereas in the scheduling app, it displayed just a little bit about the patient and a link over to the face sheet page. So we realized what we could do before merging them was just to namespace each of them differently. So instead of calling them both patient details, we'd call them, rename it so it's the face sheet patient details and the scheduling patient details. That way, when the merge happens, there's no conflict. You wind up with two separate components. And again, somewhere down the line, we can decide how to merge, how to actually combine them if they really are doing the same thing. So the other place we saw conflicts was in our package JSON. And immediately we realized things like ember.js, right, had to be on the same version in both applications. But what surprised us was there were other packages that were only in the face sheet or only in the scheduling app that we didn't think would cause any problems. But once we combined them both into the same package JSON, there were surprising conflicts that we didn't expect. So the way we solved that was to just basically add all the missing packages from one application to the other and vice versa until we wound up with two package JSONs that were identical in the original apps, and then the merge could go through smoothly. And in this case, having a really good test suite helped, saved our bacon in terms of knowing, when things failed and working through them in small pieces rather than, a huge thing where everything's broken and God knows why. So, so we were able to do the merge successfully, and it went really well, but, it sort of distracted us from deleting the backbone code. In the scheduling case, it was really important, right? Our users were feeling real pain, and it was the right thing to do. But we had a bunch of other apps, and we didn't want to pay that price of doing the merge and spending all that time on it instead of deleting backbone code. So we wondered, was there a different solution? And we came up with an old favorite or an old not a favorite, the iframe. We realized if we built a component that had an iframe in it, And we changed those other apps to be skinned so they would fit nicely in this red box with no navbar or anything like that. This component could just load a brand new other application inside of it. So this is the approach we went to, to merge or to fake merge all of our other applications. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is how we stayed motivated over time. So, we worked on this project for a little over a year, and a year is a long time. So we came up with a bunch of different techniques that helped us stay motivated. And the first one was drawing a pretty picture. So what we did is we wrote some scripts that would just count up the number of bytes of backbone code in our app and the number of bytes of Ember code in our app. And every Monday morning we ran that script and updated this chart so that we could see over time the red bar is going down. We were deleting backbone code. And again, right, it made us feel good to know that we were on the right track here. In fact, this chart, I made this chart my homepage so that I'd come in and I'd see it, first thing, because it was really exciting. And if you look closely, sort of over in the bottom right corner, we're this close away to getting, the last of that backbone out, but didn't quite make it in time for today. So the second thing we did is we defined what we were doing in business terms. So we said, a core goal of our team was to speed up our ability to deliver changes to Chirp. And the reason for this is, technical initiatives often get deprioritized and forgotten about compared to user-facing initiatives. So, and that did happen to us, but having this written down in black and white and sort of agreed as a core goal of our team helped us, whenever that started to happen, was to reprioritize it and bring it back into discussion instead of being forgotten about forever. And on the flip side, it can be exhausting, as an engineer, to work on technical cleanup for a year. So over this time, we kept shipping features. We didn't only work on this. We also did stuff to help our users and to make Chirp better. And in fact, somewhere midway through the year, our users and our product team started getting excited when they saw that changes were becoming easier, right? It became faster to make these changes, and we started getting payoff in doing these. And the last thing we did, and this I sort of mentioned when we were talking about our API redesign or the iframes, is things that were not part of our core goal of deleting backbone code, we shamelessly put them on a technical debt list of things to get to later. And so far it's worked out well for us in that it hasn't been a black hole of things that just get forgotten about. We have circled back to them and taken care of them and gotten them done. So where are we today? And basically, over the last year, we have swapped out our entire front-end application from underneath our users, for the most part without them noticing. So that's been really good. And today, we have about 95 routes, 75 models, over 200 components, which, I don't know if that feels like a big app to you, but it feels pretty big to us. And, how we did this was just by remembering that, at the end of the day, we were aiming towards having a nice, clean Ember app by really focusing on the small incremental releases, by reusing as much of our backbone code as we could in the beginning, by rewriting one component at a time, and by deferring everything that was off the critical path of deleting backbone code. And we also focused on simplifying our architecture. So we wanted to have one application, one technology. So it's so much easier now that we, when we have to work on this code base, we can go in and think Ember rather than go in and think, was this the backbone piece or the marionette piece or maybe the piece with the low React? So it's so much easier to do that. And then all those tricks I just talked about, right, to help us stay motivated and keep the momentum as we went. And of course, I'm standing up here today, but it's thanks to the whole team who worked on this that we got it done. So thank you guys very much.